Imagine this. You purchase a franchise for $890,000 and you run it for 20 years. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Early mornings, late nights. At the end of the agreement, head office call you and say, "Hey, you're doing an awesome job. We want to renew you for another 10 years." Then a couple of days later, you get another call from head office. "Hold on, we've changed our mind. We actually want you to sell the business and we're giving you a deadline to find a buyer." You start panicking. You propose multiple buyers to head office and they knock back all of them. The deadline passes and head office takes back the business. You lose $890,000. How would you feel in that situation? That is what happened to one of the 7-Eleven franchisees, and we're going to be covering it in today's video and what you need to know if you're looking at coming into a franchise. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. So the other day, I put up a reel on Instagram that went viral. Everybody was commenting on it. I put my opinion on the 7-Eleven matter, especially with the current affair piece that came out recently. Righto, so a current affair just did a massive article, a massive video about 7-Eleven and how they're ripping off franchisees, taking back their business from them. Let me give you my honest take on it. Firstly, what you need to understand is a current affair is always one-sided. They have got an agenda and they push that agenda. I'm not saying it's true, but you really need to dig deeper to hear the other side of the story. And let me tell you what the other side is. So there's been franchisees that have been in a network for 10 years. After 10 years, or whatever the agreement is in a franchise, you have the option to renew. But sometimes a franchisor might not want to renew the agreement for whatever reason, and they can choose to take the business back. In this instance, there was a couple of 7-Eleven owners who finished 10 years. They wanted to renew, but 7-Eleven didn't want to renew. And that's franchising for you. And they gave them some reasons like your sales haven't been good and a couple other reasons, and they found that to be unfair. So they just lost their business. When I dug a little bit deeper, a couple of years ago, 7-Eleven got sold, I think, for $1.7 billion to a Japanese company. The Japanese company have come in and they want to bring back corporately owned stores and not have stores run by franchises, because they figured that if we own the corporate store, we're going to make more profit than if we share the profits with the franchisee, and that does make sense in theory. So right now they're buying back all of their corporately owned stores. Now look, is it unfair on these franchisees that have spent $800,000, $1 million, and across 10 years have built all this equity to lose their business? It is unfair, right? However, with franchising, that's the game of franchising. You know, sometimes it can be unfair, right? The franchisor, they do have the option not to renew the franchise agreement. And a lot of franchise companies, if they don't want to renew the agreement, they'll create an agreement that is extremely unfair, a new one, and it makes it very difficult for the franchisee to sign it because it's got unfair terms. But that's a direction in which the new company wants to go through. So it's a bit of a difficult one, but very sad to hear some of these franchisees who are losing their business. But let me know what you think about it in the comments. Went viral. People were commenting, no, they shouldn't. They should get compensated. No, that's part of the franchise agreement. Franchisors are crook. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to make a video being a franchisor of a kids basketball program here in Australia. I'm going to give you both sides of the coin. And at the end of the video, you can tell me if you think what 7-Eleven did was ethical or not. Let's get into my first point. Point number one, how long does an actual franchise agreement last? Now, this is very important to establish because a lot of people think a franchise agreement is forever. It only stops when the franchisee wants to leave. It actually depends. Each franchise is a bit different. Our one at Little Boomers is 5 years. So each agreement goes for 5 years, and then at the end of it, there's a choice to renew or not. However, the 7-Eleven one is actually 10 years. So that's about a decade, quite longer. But the important thing to note is every franchise has a timeline of how long the agreement goes for. This is going to play key when we talk about the next couple of points. Point number two, renewal is not automatic, and this is very key. So at the end of the franchise agreement, the franchisee doesn't automatically get the approval to renew for another 5 or 10 years, right? And I think this 7-Eleven franchisee thought that if they're doing a great job, they're automatically going to be granted another 10 years. You need to understand that it is not automatically guaranteed, right? It depends on what is in the franchise agreement. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of examples straight from our franchise agreement, because I don't have the 7-Eleven franchise agreement, of when we might not renew a franchise agreement. Firstly, you have to apply 6 months before the renewal date. So if our agreement's 5 years, 6 months before, the renewal expires, you have to say, hey, I want to renew my franchise agreement. Second point, you can't be in breach when you apply for renewal. So if you are in breach of any parts of the franchise agreement, the franchisor does not have to, I should say, renew the agreement. If you're asking, well, Emile, what constitutes a breach? More on that later. And the third point, the franchisor can reject and knock you back if you are in breach, or if you don't come up with a approved buyer. This is very important, team. You need to understand this because this plays a big part in the case study. I'll say that one more time. The franchisor can knock back the renewal if you are in breach, or if you do not propose a qualified buyer that meets the conditions of the franchisor. Let's continue on. Point number 3, what happens when the agreement expires? So one of 3 things can happen when a franchise agreement expires. Say this one here. The first one is the franchisee finds a new buyer and they sell it to the new buyer and the head office approved the new buyer. Awesome, clean, the franchisee is happy, they've sold the business. Hopefully they've made a little bit of dosh on it as well. The second option is head office actually buy back the franchise. So head office in most franchise agreements have the first right of refusal. All that means is they get the first option to buy back the territory. So that's the second option, right? The second option is head office can buy it back at an agreed price. And the third one, probably the worst one, is head office take it back, the agreement gets terminated, head office take back the franchise, and you walk away with nothing. And this is what happened with one of the 7-Eleven franchisees. They proposed several buyers to head office. Head office knocked back all the buyers. The deadline went past. So head office said, hey, we want this franchise back. And the franchisee walked away with nothing. That's probably the worst thing that can happen. And that's option 3. Point number 4, conditions of the sale. This is very important that not many people know. Everybody that was commenting on that post doesn't know how franchising works. And the first thing I want to tell you is selling a franchise is not like selling a car on Facebook Marketplace, right? Somebody comes in, yeah, how many miles has it got? Yeah, is the engine good? Yeah. All right, mate, can you take cash? Yeah, here's $5,000. You walk away. You never see the buyer again. The buyer walks away with their car. That's not franchising. It's actually a lot more difficult to sell a franchise. Hey, just quickly, if you want to see if a Little Boomers basketball franchise is the right fit for you, book a discovery call with me and I'd love to have a chat. The reality is the buyer that's coming into the network has to pass the vetting procedure that head office sets with every franchisee that comes in. And a good franchise company has a very strong vetting procedure that weeds out the wrong candidates and brings in the right franchisees. For example, our vetting procedure when we're looking at bringing a new franchisee on board is always a discovery call with me for 15 minutes, then a 30-minute online business presentation. Then they do a 3-day workshop at one of our locations to get a taste of the business. We then do a reference check on them. And then finally, a franchise agreement is prepared, right? But there's a lot of steps that the buyer has to go and they need to meet the requirements of head office. And if at any one of those stages, they don't meet the requirements, head office are allowed to say, no, they don't meet the requirements. And in fact, one of our potential franchise buyers, we had a gentleman by the name of David. He was interested in buying one of the territories that our franchisees were selling. He met up with him and then he started our procedure. He did the 3-day workshop. And guess what? The last part was the reference check. When we did our reference check, there was some things that were brought to our attention about him and his previous work that we thought, okay, oh, this is a bit weird. Let's have a discussion with him. And when we opened up and had a discussion with him, he got very defensive about that, quite frustrated and upset as well, and eventually parted ways. So that's a great example of somebody in our network that didn't pass our vetting procedure. Now, by the way, this has nothing about me or any franchisor being difficult. This is all stipulated and stated in the franchise agreement that you or the franchisee would have signed. And here's a couple other things that I want to mention that are straight from our franchise agreement when it comes time to the conditions of the sale. Number one, you need head office's written consent to sell a franchise. You can't just, ghost us and just sell it to any Joe Blow. Number two, head office gets the first right to buy it back. We call that the first right of refusal. All that means is that when you're selling your franchise, before you go to the market, you've got to come to us first, and we have a choice of whether we want to buy it back from you. The third point is your buyer has to meet all the criteria that's set by the franchisor. I just mentioned that earlier on. And the last one is you can't be in breach. If you are a current franchisee and you are in breach of anything in the franchise agreement, which we're going to talk about later, you cannot sell your business, right? We can actually take it back. And by the way, this is exactly what happened with that 7-Eleven franchisee. They had a deadline of when they needed to sell the business. They proposed buyers to head office. Head office knocked them all back. Eventually, the deadline passed. Head office took the territory back. Now, I don't know what the criteria is for a 7-Eleven franchise. I don't know if those buyers met the criteria, but I guess the question is whether those proposed buyers met the criteria that 7-Eleven sets for their franchisees. That's a real question. Point number 5, the agreement can be terminated early if you are in breach. This is really important thing. As I said earlier, a franchise agreement can go for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. It doesn't necessarily mean you're guaranteed to go through to that duration. If you breach at any time, the franchisor can terminate the agreement. Now, what constitutes a breach is always laid out in the franchise agreement. That's why you got to make sure you review it to see what constitutes a breach. But I'll give you a couple examples with our agreement of what constitutes a breach. Here we go. Not paying your fees on time. So if you don't pay your royalty fees, and I think it's after 30 days and you just ghost us, that's a direct breach violation. If you're operating below the standards or not in accordance to our operations manual, all an operations manual is in a franchise is like the step-by-step playbook on how to run the business. Most franchise companies have an ops manual. It's called ops manual for short. It's an operation manual that details everything. If you are not running your business in accordance to the operation manual that the franchisor has set, that is a breach notice. For example, one of our conditions is every single class has to have 2 coaches running it per class. If for whatever reason a franchisee says to save costs, I want to slice one coach and only have one coach run the class, bang, that's a direct breach notice. The next point, underpaying staff, not paying superannuation, or anything that's violating employment law here in Australia is a direct breach as well. And that's really important to know. If a franchisee is skimming their staff, not paying superannuation, not paying in accordance to an award, for example, bang, direct violation, a direct breach violation. And by the way, if you're wondering, is there a case study? If you go look at Baker's Delight, right? Baker's Delight is a franchisor. They are currently, I think they got fined $600,000, don't quote me on it, because a lot of the franchisees were underpaying their staff. And the franchisor got fined. Imagine that. Imagine I'm running a company and I've got franchisees and I get fined because my franchisees are not compliant with Australian law, right? The ACCC has now said that franchisors, if they knew about it and chose not to take any actions, are also going to get fined as well. So that's really big. And my last point on this, Payday Super kicks in July 1st, 2026. So our franchisees need to be paying superannuation to their employees instantly when they process their pay slip. And it's our job right now as a franchisor to enforce this and to make sure that franchisees are doing this. Otherwise, we could be liable if they're not. Now, my last point is what I call the punch in the gut, which is they walked away with nothing. And this is why the public was upset. This franchisee in particular walked away with $0. He or she couldn't sell the business. And in franchising, there's a term that's used that's called goodwill. I'll explain what it is because it's used a lot. All goodwill is, for example, if I run a 7-Eleven franchise for 20 years, during those 20 years, I've improved the reputation of the business, hopefully at least. I've increased my loyal customer base. I've delivered value to the community. Effectively, I've made 7-Eleven more known in that community in a good way. That's goodwill. It's kind of intangible. And the sad thing is this franchisee who may have spent 20 years, who actually did spend 20 years developing all of this goodwill, at the end of the 20 years doesn't get compensated at all for it. And that's why the public was upset, because the goodwill stays with the brand. It stays with the franchisor. The goodwill is not attached to the franchisee, right? I can't say, hey, I've done all this goodwill for the last 20 years. Why can't I get compensated? In the franchise agreement, most of the time, the goodwill stays with the franchisor and the brand. All right, so to conclude, I've got 3 takeaways for you, and I've written them down here. Number 1, read your franchise agreement thoroughly. Please, for the love of God, read your franchise agreement, especially things like the renewal, the end of term, and even the sales selection. Too many people get excited when they're coming into a franchise and they don't read. Please read the agreement. Number 2, understand the sale and renewal process before you ever need it, right? You always got to know what the end looks like. What is the exit plan? Understand what the renewal terms are, what the sale terms are if you want to sell the franchise ever in the future. Always come with the end in mind. And the third takeaway is understand what the qualifications are that head office need. Because if you ever go to sell your franchise, you're going to want to make sure your potential buyer has those qualifications that head office look for. So make sure you know what those are. Righto, guys, that brings us to the end of the video. Let me know what you think of it. Do you feel like now that you know all the information, this 7-Eleven franchisee, was it ethical? Was it unethical? What head office done? Drop it in the comments below. And also, if you want to see another video, I made one called Can You Really Sell a Franchise? Click the link below to watch that video. I'll see you in the next one. God bless.